Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Everyday School Day with the Butterfly Princess. This week at the Butterfly Princess Academy, we're looking at the Lex 21 of the course Jesus and His Jewish Influences, taught by Professor Jody Magnus. Now, this Lex 21 of this series is entitled Josephus, Witness to First Century AD. Here goes. Flavius Josephus lived between 37 and 100 CE, was a Roman Jewish historian, military leader and scholar whose works provide critical insights into first century Judaism, the First Jewish-Roman War, and early Christianity. He was born Yosef Ben in Jerusalem to a priestly family with Hasmonean royal ancestry. He later adopted the Roman name Titus Flavius Josephus after gaining. He later adopted the Roman name Titus Flavius Josephus after gaining Roman citizenship. Key contributions and works: military and political role. Josephus initially fought against Rome as a Jewish general in Galilee during the First Jewish-Roman War after surrendering to Vespasian in 67 CE. He prophesied Vespasian's rise to emperorship, which spared his life. He later served as an advisor to Titus during the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE, which destroyed the Second Temple. Major writings: The Jewish War chronicles the Jewish revolts against Rome, offering a detailed account of the war's causes, events, and aftermath. It remains a primary source for understanding Roman military tactics and Jewish resistance. Antiquities of the Jews, a 20-volume history from creation to the Roman era, blending biblical narratives with Hellenistic historiography, notable for its mention of Jesus, John the Baptist, and James the Just. Against opinion, a defiance of Judaism against Hellenistic critics. Biblical and theological perspectives. Josephus interpreted Genesis through a Jewish-Roman lens, describing the Nepilism as offsprings of fallen angels and human women, linking them to Greek mythology giants. He also affirmed a global flood, inciting non-biblical sources to validate the art's existence. Controversies and legacy. Testimonial. His reference to Jesus in Antiques in chapters 18 verses 3 is debated. While most scholars accept partial authenticity, some argue Christian scribes later interspersed phrases like "he was the Christ." Criticism: accused of being a Roman collaborator. Josephus emphasised Jewish resilience while framing Rome's victory as divine punishment for Jewish sins. Influence: early Christians like Jerome relied on his works for historical context, though his writings were less energetic than Philo's. Josephus remains for studying Second Temple Judaism, Roman Jewish relations, and the social political backdrop of the New Testament. Flavius Josephus served as a military commander of Galilee during the First Jewish-Roman War that happened between 66 and 70 CE. Appointed by Jewish leaders in Jerusalem to organise the region's defence against Rome, Josephus forfeited towns like Galilee. However, his leadership faced internal challenges, including opposition from factions led by John of rival Galilean leader, who accused Josephus of disloyalty and later became a key figure in Jerusalem resistance. After surrendering to Vespasian in 67 CE, Josephus defected to the Romans while John continued resisting until fleeing to Jerusalem. Modern references to a commander of Galilee are unrelated to this historical context. During the First Jewish-Roman War after the fall of Yagfa in 67 CE, Flavius Josephus and about 40 of his men hid in a cave. Facing capture by the Romans, the group decided to commit suicide rather than surrender. According to Josephus's account, he's suggesting a method of collective suicide. The men would draw lots to kill each other in turn, with the last man taking his own life. However, the process resulted in Josephus and one other man being the last survivors. Instead of completing the suicide pact, Josephus convinced the other man to surrender to the Romans with him. Josephus's decision to surrender and his corruption with the Romans have been controversial. Critics have accused him of cowardness and betrayal, suggesting that his account of the suicide pact was in fact fabricated to excuse his actions. Conversely, some argue that Josephus believed he could better serve his people by negotiating with the Romans. Regardless, his actions and writings remain a significant, if debated, part of history. The suicide pact involving Flavius Josephus and his men occurred after the fall of Yogvat in 67 CE during the First Jewish-Roman War. According to Josephus's account in the Jewish War, the specific reasons were immediate Roman capture. After a 47-day siege, Roman forces under Vespasian breached Yogvat's defences. Josephus and about 40 fighters retreated to a cave, realising escape was impossible. Surrender meant execution, enslavement and humiliation by the Romans, who had already massacred 40,000 Jews in the city and enslaved 1,200 women and children. Cultural and religious honour. Josephus claimed his men preferred death to surrender, viewing suicide as a way to preserve their dignity and avoid violating Jewish laws against idolatry or submission to pagan conquerors. This mirrored the Jewish zealots' ethos of martyrdom and capitalism. Josephus's controversial strategy. Josephus proposed a lottery system where each man would kill the next in turn, with the last survivor taking his own life. However, he allegedly manipulated the outcome, surviving with one other man and convincing him to surrender. Critics argue Josephus fabricated this narrative to justify his defection to Rome. While Josephus framed the pact as a noble refusal to yield, his survival and collaboration with Rome cast doubt on his motives. This event underscores the desperation of Jewish resistance and the brutal realities of Roman conquest. The authenticity of Josephus's account of the suicide pact, both at Yagvat and Masada, is widely debated among scholars, with significant evidence suggesting elements of fabrication or embellishment. Here's a systematic synthesis of the key arguments. lack of corroborating evidence. Josephus's narratives is the sole surviving ancient account of these events. No other contemporary sources, Jewish or Roman, confirm the suicide pact. At Masada, archaeologists found pottery shards inscribed with names near a burial area with Yagal Yagin interpreted as Yagin, who was an Israeli archaeologist, interpreted for lots from Josephus's accounts. However, scholars such as Jody Magnus note that these could also be food ration tickets or administrative records. Josephus's motivations and bias. Josephus had strong incentives to justify his surrender to Rome. His survival and later role as a Roman collaborator likely influenced his portrayal of Jewish resistance as notable yet doomed, causing Rome's victory as divinely ordained. The Slavic version of the Jewish war explicitly claims Josephus rigged the Yodfat suicide lottery to save himself, a detail absent in his original account. Historical and cultural context. Suicide was taboo in Judaism, making Josephus' description of mass suicide, even at Masada, theologically problematic. Some scholars argue he may have invented the stories to align Jewish resistance with Roman Stoic ideas of honourable deaths. At Masada, Josephus describes 967 deaths, but archaeologists found only 28 skeletons, none definitively linked to mass suicide. Modern scholarly consensus. Many historians, including Magnus, argue that the suicide narratives are literal constructs meant to determinise Jewish resilience, dramatise Jewish resilience, while absolving Rome of excessive brutality. Others, like Walter Zanger, advocate accepting Josephus's account as written unless disproving, citing his general reliability on other events. While Josephus's accounts of the suicide pacts cannot be definitely disproven, their historical accuracy is questionable. They likely blend flat with rhetorical intervention shaped by Josephus's political agenda and the absence of corroborating evidence. The stories remain influential but should be approached critically. Flavius Josephus, the Jewish War and Jewish Antiques are foundational historical works documenting Jewish history in the First Jewish Revolt, Roman War. The Jewish War chronicles the Jewish revolt against Rome, starting with the Maccabean revolt and culminating in the destruction of Jerusalem and the Temple in 70 CE. Includes events like the Siege of Masada and mass suicides. Josephus aims to correct incorrect histories by Roman writers, portraying Jewish resistance as noble but doomed, while framing Rome's victories divinely ordained. Divided into 7 books, blending eyewitnesses' accounts, Josephus fought as a Jewish general before defecting to Rome, with dramatic narratives of Roman military tactics and Jewish heroism. Primary source for Roman-Jewish relations and early Christian context, for example, references to Jesus, his brother James the Just. criticised for pro-Roman bias and potential establishments such as the suicide pacts of Yogvat and Masada, Jewish Antiques, a 20-volume history from creation to 66 CE, merging biblical narratives, for example, Adam Moses with Hellenistic historiography, includes the Hasmonean dynasty, Herod the Great, and Roman rule. Purpose: to present Jewish histories as comparable to Greco-Roman traditions, appealing to educated Roman audiences. Josephus cites non-biblical sources. Testimony, right. Detailed accounts of John the Baptist and Pontius Pilate, bridges biblical and post-biblical Jewish history, offering insights into Second Temple Jerusalem, critiques for inconsistencies and reliance on lost sources, aspect the Jewish law, Jewish antiquities. Right, so I've done that. Josephus' narratives emphasise Roman military superiority and Jewish falsifications. Critics argue he downplayed Roman brutality while vilifying Jewish rebels as bandits or madmen. His accounts of mass suicide and divine punishment for Jewish sins shaped later Christian and Roman historiography. For modern readers, the Jewish war remains indispensable for understanding the war's treachery despite its pro-Roman biases and occasional dramatisation. Josephus, a Jewish general who defected to the Roman side, had a clear bias. He aimed to portray Roman actions favourably and justify his own choices. He needed to explain his defection and present himself as a valuable asset to the Roman Empire. Apocalyptic narrative. Josephus wrote to explain the reasons for the Jewish defeat and to appeal to a Roman audience, aiming to foster understanding and potentially marginate further conflict. His works were intended to be read by Roman officials and elites, so he tailored his narratives to align with the interests and perspectives. Select emphasis on Jewish infighting. Josephus often extravaganting internal conflicts among Jewish factions to emphasise the weakness of the Jewish resistance. Downplaying Roman brutality. While he acknowledged some Roman excesses, he tended to minimise or excuse their violence and cruelty. Dramatic narratives. Josephus was known for establishing events to create more compelling stories, often extravagating numbers or emphasising dramatic moments. He sometimes included supernatural or miraculous elements to underscore the divine favour towards certain actions. Reliance on personal experience. While Josephus was an eyewitness to some events, he relied on second-hand accounts and potentially biased sources for others. Many of his claims cannot be independently verified due to the absence of contemporary sources. Given these factors, it is essential to approach Josephus' writings with a critical eye. While they offer valuable insights into the First Jewish-Roman War and Jewish history, they should be supplemented with other sources and perspectives to gain a more balanced and lucid understanding of the events. The Flavian dynasty, founded by Vespasian and continued by his sons Titus and of his sons, relied heavily on propaganda to legitimize their rule after the chaos of Nero's fall and the year of the four emperors. Their strategies blended military triumph, public works, and ideological narratives to consolidate power. Military victories as divine favour. The siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE and the destruction of the Second Temple were framed as victories ordained by Roman gods. Titus's triumphs included parading Jewish captives and sacred relics like the menorah through Rome, immortalised on the Ark of Titus. Extravagant naval victories like the minor skirmish of Lake during the Jewish War was evaluated to mythic status through coins, Victorian navals and public spectators, echoing Augustus' victory at Actium. The Flavian Colosseum symbolised Rome's revival under Vespasian. Funded by spoils from Judea, it showcased imperial generosity and power while distinguishing the Flavians from Nero's self-indulgence. Coins promoted themes of peace, pax augusta, military prowess, and divine appeal. Titus and were depicted as heroes, commanders, while Vespasian's humble Italian origins were emphasised to construct with Julio-Claudian descendancy. A disputed reference to Jesus in Jewish antiques may have been interpreted later, but reflects efforts to align with emerging Christian narratives. The Flavians circulated stories of poverty under Caligula Nero to portray themselves as virtuous reformers. Achievements of bad emperors are minimalised, while Vespasian's fiscal regime new taxes were framed as necessary for stability. Done enough on that. Early Christian responses. Some scholars argue that the Gospel of Mark, for example, was an early Christian response to Roman imperial propaganda, offering an alternative narrative of power and authority centered on Jesus rather than the Roman Empire. Historical memory contributed to a historical narrative that framed Jews as rebellious and deserving of Roman domination. This legacy influenced subsequent Roman policies and attitudes towards Jews in the centuries that followed. The destruction of the temple and the loss of political autonomy led to significant changes in Jewish religious practices and communal structures, with greater emphasis on synagogues, rabbinic authority, and diaspora communities. Josephus in Christian tradition. Flavius Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian, holds a unique position in Christian tradition due to his writings about key biblical events and figures. His works were preserved and reinterpreted by Christian scholars, shaping theological and historical narratives for centuries. The Testament in Jewish Antiques, Book 18, Josephus briefly mentions Jesus of Nazareth in a passage known as Testament. Describes Jesus as a wise man, miracle worker, and Messiah, whose followers claim he rose from the dead. Debates over authenticity. Most scholars agree the passage is resulted by Christian scribes, as Josephus, a non-Christian Jew, would not have affirm Jesus' divinity. However, a core reference to Jesus' execution under Pilate is likely original. Early Christians used this passage to claim an independent Jewish witness to Jesus, enhancing its provenance in medieval manuscripts. Josephus' The Jewish Law provided Christians with a framework to interpret the fall of Jerusalem as divine punishment and for Jews' rejection of Jesus. His vivid description of the temple's destruction and Jewish suffering was cited as fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy in Luke chapters 19 verses 43 to 44. Scenes like the cannibalism during the siege war were used to portray Jews as morally bankrupt before reinforcing some theology, persuasion and application, survival through Christian copying. Without Christian interest, Josephus' works might have been lost. In short, his texts were copied in monasteries. Scholars like Bede and other writers integrated Josephus into biblical commentaries, using him to harmonize Roman and sacred history. The test remains continuous. While most agree on late Christian edits, Josephus' original reference to Jesus as a historical figure is widely accepted. Reclaiming Jewish context, scholars now emphasise Josephus' Jewish identity and his intent to defend Judaism, countering Christian assumptions. Yeah. Right. Both works address critical phases of Jewish history over Roman rule, combining archaeological and textual evidence to explore themes of resistance, identity, and survival. Magnus chapter 10, the early Roman period. Magnus focuses on Masada, a Herodian fortress and the site of the Jewish rebels' last stand during the First Jewish-Roman War. Key points include Herodian construction, Herod the Great expansion of Masada palaces, storehouses as a desert retreat and military stronghold. Siege and destruction, archaeological evidence, Roman siege camps, prejudice stones, and disrupted suicide pact described by Josephus sheds light on the Roman assault. Magnus critiques Romicalized narratives of Masada, emphasising the lack of definitive proof for mass suicide and questioning Josephus' reliability as a Flavian propagandist. The Herodian dynasty's collaboration with Rome and its impact on Jewish autonomy. Material, cultural analysis of pottery, coins, and archaeological architecture reveals social and resistance strategies. Schiffman's chapter 9, Revolves. Schiffman examines Jewish responses to Roman domination, focusing on literal and theological adaptation after the destruction of the Second Temple. Crisis and renewal. Texts like Breach and Brunch for Ezra reinterprets controversial theological framing and temple destruction as divine chastisement rather than abandonment. Rabbinic leadership. The emergence of rabbis as spiritual leaders who shifted focus from temple rituals to Torah study. Bar-Kokhba revolves. Schiffman analyses rebel coins and letters to reconstruct the revolts. Massive favouring. No, I just want to find this. Josephus' work survived through Christian transmission rather than Jewish preservations due to historical, cultural, and theological factors. Jewish rejection of Josephus as a traitor. Josephus defected to the Romans during the First Jewish Revolt, earning him lasting scorn amongst Jewish communities. Perceived betrayal. His collaboration with Rome and role in the siege of Jerusalem cemented his reputation as a traitor. Jewish scholars like the Talmud ignore him, reflecting collective disdain. Language shift. Josephus wrote in Greek, which declined among Jews after the 1st century CE. Later Jewish scholarship prioritised Hebrew and Aramaic texts, merging his works. Christian interest in Josephus' historical context. Christians preserved Josephus because his writings corroborated the New Testament figures. He mentions John the Baptist, James the Just, brother of Jesus, and possibly Jesus himself, providing rare external validation for Christian narratives. Explain Jewish-Roman conflicts. His accounts for temple's destruction was interpreted as divine punishment for rejecting Jewish Jesus, reinforcing Christian theology, Christian editing and propaganda, which describes Jesus. It likely contains Christian additions, while scholars debate its authenticity. Even a partial made Josephus valuable for anti-Jewish policy. Ultimate Christians use Josephus' portrayal of Jewish fascisms to argue that Judaism has been supplanted by Christianity. Josephus wrote in Greek, aligning with early Christian linguistic preferences. His works were copied by monks in medieval Europe, ensuring survival. Roman parentage. As a client of the Flavian dynasty, Josephus' writings circulated in elite Roman circles, later adapted by Christian seeking historical legitimacy. Jewish tradition, rabbinical Judaism focused on legal and texts, Talmud. Right. Josephus became a bridge between biblical and Roman history, cited by and other church fathers to contextualize Jesus' era. Josephus' survival reflects his unity to Christians as a historical witness and propaganda tool, while his betrayal in Greek language worked alienated Jewish audiences. His dual role as an apologist for Rome and advocate Christian ally ensured his legacy in Western but not Christian traditions. And just to finish off, ladies and gentlemen, I've come up with my own fictional narrative about Josephus. The story is called The Chronicler's Burden. 5th century CE, Galilee to Rome, prologue, the cave. 67 CE. The stench of smoke and blood clung to the air as Josephus Bammatters crouched in the dark, listening to the screams above. The Roman siege of Jotapata had lasted 47 days. Now the city burned. Around him, 40 Jewish rebels, starving, wounded, debated surrender or suicide. Josephus, their 30-year-old commander, felt the weight of his failing cause. We die as free men, not slaves, shouted Eliza, raising a dagger. Josephus hesitated. His mind flashed to the dream he'd had weeks prior. A voice thundering, "You will testify to the fall of nations." Flavius Josephus, the Romanized name, chilled him. As the rebels drew lots to kill one another, Josephus manipulated the order when only he and one man remained. He persuaded him to surrender. Act 1, the prophecy. Vespasian, the Roman general, interrogated Josephus in his tent. Desperate, Josephus gambled. "You will become Caesar, my lord. Nero's reign ends in blood. You and your son Titus will rule the world." Vespasian scoffed, but spared him. Intrigued, change became parentage. Act 3, witness to Jerusalem. 70 CE. From the Roman camp, Josephus watched Titus' legions breach Jerusalem's walls. He pleaded for mercy as flames engulfed the temple, its gold melting like honey. "Why have you forsaken us?" he whispered in Aramaic, torn between horror and duty. He recorded it all: the starvation, the cannibalism, and zealots infighting. At night, he drafted letters to the rebels, urging surrender. Few listened. Act 3, Masada's Echo, 73 CE. Josephus stood beside Titus as Masada's base, squinting at the fortress where 917 scourge defined Rome. When the walls fell, they found only corpses. "They chose death over your mercy," Titus said, awe and disgust mingling. Josephus scribed notes, his hands trembling. What will history say to us? Epilogue, the ghost of Rome, 95 CE. An old man now, Josephus paced his villa, haunted by ghosts. His Jewish War, a bestseller in Rome, was read as a triumph of Flavians, not a degree for Judea. One night, a veiled woman entered his study. "Your works will outlive Rome," she hissed, a Judean accent. "But at what cost, traitor?" He woke screaming. Dawn found him editing adding a cryptic line. "Some truths are prisons, others cages." Author's note. This fictional account amplifies Josephus' documented struggles, his survivorist pragmatism, his role as both traitor and preserver, and the psychological toll of bearing witness. While speculative, it echoes his own words. "I was myself an actor in many and an eyewitness of most of the events." His legacy remains a mosaic of courage, compassion, and contradiction. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes this week's week's episode of Every Day's a School Day. Hope you can join me for next week's instalment, but until then, have a lovely rest of your week and I will see you very soon. Bye bye for now. Take care.